Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if reading for fun can actually make you smarter by teaching you new words? Well, this new study dives deep into exactly that question. We're looking at whether reading for pleasure supports vocabulary learning and if the number of times you see a word actually helps you learn it. Think of it like this. Can the sheer act of reading more books help you build a bigger vocabulary? And does seeing a word over and over really cement it in your brain? So, why is vocabulary so important? Well, scientists tell us that vocabulary differences are noticeable right from the start of school and they tend to stick around. Having a strong vocabulary is super helpful for understanding school subjects, but teaching all the words kids need is a huge task. That is why researchers are really interested in independent reading or reading for pleasure, as a way for kids and teens to learn new words naturally. Now, we know that kids who read more tend to have bigger vocabularies. But here is the catch: most kids and teens don't actually read for fun very much. And this reading habit often declines as they get older. So the big question is, can we actually get them to read more? And if they do, will they learn more words? To figure this out, the researchers tried something pretty cool. They took a well-known method used to encourage healthy habits, like eating more fruits and vegetables, and adapted it for reading. They worked with over 250 11 to 14-year-old students. These students were given age-appropriate fiction books to read. Some students were in a special group called the intervention group, and they got this behavior change program. This program involved keeping a reading diary, setting reading goals for themselves, getting text message reminders and feedback to help them stick to their goals, and even some small rewards. The other students were in a control group, and they just got some basic information about why reading is important. The researchers wanted to see if the intervention group would read more than the control group, but they also did something really clever because they used commercially available books that were part of an electronic corpus. They could actually track exactly how many times each student encountered specific words from those books. This print exposure was then linked to how well students learned the meanings of those words. Now, let's get to what they found. Did the fancy text message program work to get kids reading more? Well, the study found that the intervention group didn't actually read more than the control group. So, the behavior change program as designed didn't boost the amount of reading. This was a bit of a surprise. However, and this is where it gets really interesting, the study did find a link between how often students saw certain words and whether they learned those words. Essentially, the more a word appeared in the books they read, the better they were at recalling or recognizing its meaning, and this held up even after taking other factors into account. Looking at the details, you can see that the intervention group did borrow more of the special books provided, but the number of pages they read overall wasn't significantly different from the control group. This suggests the intervention didn't make them read more pages, even if they picked up the books more often. When they looked at the actual reading activity, there was a significant interaction between time and condition. This means that the intervention group actually showed a slightly larger decline in their self-reported reading activity compared to the control group. That is the opposite of what they hoped for. But here is a glimmer of hope within that. The researchers found that for the kids in the intervention group who did engage more with the reading diary, their reading activity decreased less than for those who barely used the diary. So, while the overall intervention didn't boost reading, engagement with the process itself seemed to matter. Now, moving on to the vocabulary learning question. This is where things get really exciting. They found that more exposures to the vocabulary items, meaning the more times a word appeared in the books the students read, were significantly associated with better performance on the definition production task. They also found that higher self-reported reading activity, which is like how much they said they read outside of school, also predicted better definition production. It seems like reading more and seeing words more often both contribute to learning. Even when they accounted for other factors like existing vocabulary knowledge and reading ability, the number of exposures to the words still played a role, though it became less significant for the production task. This suggests that seeing a word multiple times really helps, even if you are already a good reader. But the really strong finding comes from the definition recognition task. Here, a higher number of exposures to the vocabulary items was significantly associated with higher scores on the recognition task. And get this effect of exposures remained significant even after they controlled for all the background measures like vocabulary, reading comprehension, and spelling. This strongly suggests that seeing a word more often directly helps you recognize and learn its meaning independently of how good a reader you already are. So, what does all of this mean? On the one hand, the behavior change intervention using text messages and diaries didn't quite manage to get adolescents reading more overall. The engagement with the diary was quite low, which the researchers think was a major hurdle. It is a reminder that getting teenagers to change their habits, even something as beneficial as reading, is really challenging. They even suggest that perhaps the daily reminders might have been a bit annoying for those not reading much already. However, and this is a huge however, the study provided pretty strong evidence that print exposure, meaning the number of times you encounter a word, is directly linked to vocabulary learning. Even in a natural setting with regular books, seeing a word more often helps students learn its meaning. This aligns with the idea that reading, even if it is not boosted by an intervention, is still a powerful tool for building vocabulary. The researchers noted that this effect was particularly strong on the recognition task, suggesting that while you might learn to recognize a word better with more exposure, deeply understanding and producing its definition might require even more or different types of exposure. They also pointed out that the quality of the words in the books might matter too, and that sometimes learning a completely new word benefits more from repeated exposure than familiar one. So, to wrap it all up, while the specific intervention to boost reading didn't hit its mark, the core idea that reading helps you learn new words seems to hold true. The more you encounter a word, the more likely you are to learn it, and this effect is noticeable, even in the context of reading commercially available fiction books. It's a good reminder that one of the best ways to expand your vocabulary is simply to read more, and that every time you see a word, you are building a little more knowledge. Now, what is my take on this? I think it is fascinating how they tried to use a behavior change technique from health and apply it to reading. It shows the complexity of behavior change, especially with adolescents, and highlights that engagement is absolutely key. Just because you offer a system doesn't mean people will use it consistently. The low uptake of the diary is a really important takeaway for anyone designing interventions. But the part about word exposure is super exciting. It validates what many of us intuitively feel, that reading is a treasure trove of words. The fact that repeated exposure helped even when controlling for general word frequency is strong evidence that it is the context of the book and the repetition within it that is driving the learning. It also makes me think about the quality of reading. Were the books engaging enough? Were the words presented in a way that made them easy to learn? Maybe future studies could combine this great idea of tracking exposure with interventions that also focus on the quality of the reading experience. For example, could we create more interactive reading environments that not only increase exposure but also highlight new words in meaningful ways? Or perhaps focus on different types of books or reading materials? It is clear that getting kids to read more is a challenge. But the benefits for vocabulary learning are undeniable. We just need smarter, more engaging ways to get them there. What do you think? Does this study change how you view reading for pleasure? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more explorations into the fascinating world of psychology. See you next time.